Okay, welcome everybody to the second quarter of the Mystery Book Club, sponsored by the Upstate South Carolina chapter of Sisters in Crime. We're delighted to have you with us this morning. And our guest moderator for this quarter is George Kramer, a West Coast author who's up at 9 a.m. this morning, joining us from California. And George, we're going to be reading George's book in 2 months. Is it Robbers and Cops? Robbers and Cops, right? So we're looking forward to that. I'll let George tell you a little bit more about himself, and then he's going to take it away. Go for it, George.
I guess I should sit up. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. 9 a.m. is a great time for me. I told Sally earlier I tried to log in at 8 because I was so anxious to get here and see you folks. But I am a West Coast author. I'm happy that you're going to be reading my book in a couple of months. But let me tell you a little bit about Donnell. I hope she's not listening because I want you to know I think she's an utterly fantastic author. She's turned into a mentor for me. I'm sad that she won't be at PSWA so I can give her a well-deserved hug. Anyway, she has written in the past 4 romantic suspense novels, and then she did some work and she moved over. The reviews say police procedurals. I think they're more thriller. And the first one is Black Pearl. And it's extremely well written. There are a lot of, well, if you've already read it, you know there are twists and turns and slap you in the face and turn you around. So she's just a wonderful author. Anyway, I'll quit gushing and say, let's keep going there, Donnell.
Thanks, George. I appreciate it. I was listening. I was hanging on every word. That's very kind of you.
All right, folks, here we're going to get going. And I hope that we get some questions from the group. That's because it's a book club and you guys probably have a few more questions than I do. But Donnell, tell us about Black Pearl, your writing process, and a little bit how you decided to go over to these type books.
When I write romantic suspense, because I haven't completely given it up, there are so many other people who do it, in my opinion, better. When I published with Bell Books, my editor at the time, Pat Van Wee, said to me, "We're buying you for your suspense, not because you're a great romantic suspense writer." I love the suspense. In fact, when I wrote, they published The Past Came Hunting, and it was Walkaway Joe. It was a Golden Heart finalist in RWA, and my agent at the time had me sex up the book. Well, I'm not a sexy writer at all. And so as soon as I published with Bell, Pat said, "Oh, and get rid of all that sex because you're not good at it." So there's people who do it well and you never miss it. I call it plumbing because it's just superfluous. And I don't like sex scenes that are inserted just for the fact that they're inserted. I had a great friend who passed away, Diane Drake, who wrote for medical Harlequins. And she used to have 10 sex scenes that were in her books. And she would just take one out for the book that she wrote 40, 50 books, right? And she would take out her sex scene and put it in. And her editor said one time, "I think I've read this one before." So I just at this point went, you know what? I love suspense. I love romantic suspense. I'm a fan of anyone who does romantic suspense well. I'm not one of them. However, my books have romance in them, but without the plumbing. Does that make sense? So, George, back to your question. When I started writing Black Pearl, this was several versions later that I came up with it. And it started out when I was in high school. When I was in school, I lost one of my best friends to murder. And I've always had the theme of justice in mind. It was a really heartbreaking experience. She was killed when she was 21 years old, and we had gone our separate ways by then. And her husband killed her when he came home high on angel dust. I am not a fan of legalizing drugs. I think they come from the devil. However, when I just remembered all of my past with her, and I wanted to put something in it about Raylyn, who is the person who is the victim. Allison is the survivor, and that stems back to that childhood trauma that I had, and I think my passion for it must have shown through.
I believe that it does. I'm curious about the title, Black Pearl, and how you came up with that idea.
I did not. My editor did. And my publisher did. I don't get to choose my titles, but
Okay.
it kind of grew on me after I did, because it was so apropos to the book. That's what the killer does. He leaves a black pearl on the victim.
And where did you get that idea?
I needed something. If you read thrillers, they usually leave one scene, one token. You've heard of collectors, and you've heard of people leaving a scene at the evidence for their call sign, their signature. And that's what I decided to do. I was going to make it a white pearl necklace. And then my friend Karen Huxman, who was a wonderful reader for me at the time, she says, you know, black pearls are pretty. So I have to give her credit for it, because she came up with the idea. And I started researching black pearls, and they are fascinating. If you read the book, you'll see I go into detail about how they come. There's cultured pearls, there's natural pearls, and there's fake pearls. And I loved learning that real pearls are warm in your hand.
Yeah.
And fake pearls do not. They're always cool. And I love that idea.
Ah.
Okay. Well, Michael Black just joined us, so that kind of threw me. But characters, you have some wonderful characters in this book, and it's not your protagonist or antagonist, but I really fell for the Denver police lieutenant. Where did he come from?
Thank you for asking about him. His name is Everett T. Pope, and I named him after one of my coworkers at GTE Government Systems. I had a wonderful coworker who was an African-American electrical engineer, smart as a whip, and had a comeback for everything. And no nonsense, lots of fun. And it just made sense to me to name Pope after Jake. So waving to Jake, if he's anywhere listening. This has been so many years. I hope Jake is still with us, but.
Oh, good. And speaking of the lieutenant, he becomes part of a task force. How did you decide on who was going to be there? And what about egos?
Okay, I'll try to break that down into two questions, George. I love thrillers. I love mysteries. And I listen to a lot of audiobooks going back and forth to Colorado, as I'm doing now because of my mom. And as I see this, I'm listening to all these fantastic mystery readers that if they're not, for instance, if they're a police detective, I'll name one of my favorite authors, who is Robert Crace. And he always has his detective, who is Elvis Cole. He's and Bob Craze calls him the world's greatest detective. And he's always calling the police station for his one contact so he can get information. And I thought, that's really good. And I'd listen to others, and they always have this contact. They always have the uncle, or they have somebody in law enforcement. And I thought, why not go to the top and be law enforcement and create a task force? So that's how the idea got started. George, I don't remember your last question. Sorry.
How do you, that's a multi-agency, and you have people of all different ranks and not necessarily in charge. How did you deal, or how do you deal with all the egos that get involved?
That is a really interesting question. And the reason, when you watch it on television, there's always that conflict. There's the two FBI agent and the cop don't get along. And I thought, how does a crime ever get solved if they're always fighting? And I thought, yeah, there's going to be conflict, because if you don't have conflict, you don't have a story. But you've got to solve the crime. So I wanted them, there's problems. I have conflict in my book, and in my second book, Until Dead, we have a huge conflict because one of the characters finds out he knows the antagonist. And that is a huge problem, huge conflict. Another thing is Special Agent Brian DiPietro, who was once a senior, good grief, supervisory agent. He accepted a demotion rather than have to be behind a desk. He wanted to be out back in the field. So he basically is in charge. So I do have someone in charge of these task force.
I have a question.
Yes.
Donnell, do you have a background in police work?
No, I've done a lot of volunteer for law enforcement. I was a former court reporter, so I had the legal background. I did a lot of volunteer work. I did ride-alongs. I volunteered for the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado Springs, and I did the Colorado Springs Citizens Academy. And I did, of course, the Riders Police Academy. And I think I came and talked to South Carolina or North Carolina at that time, and had a wonderful visit with some of your members then. I just have always been fascinated with it. I have a deep respect for law enforcement because they have the hardest jobs ever.
Okay.
I have a question along those lines, if I can jump in. I don't know what the rules are, but anyway.
Jump in.
I'll jump in. So that trope of a friend in law enforcement, my editor suggested I add it in my book, and I did not, because I thought, that doesn't happen. So tell me about that, Donnell and George. Is that, and of course, this is fiction, and I made up a lot of stuff, but I didn't want to add that. So tell me about that.
Well, congratulations on seeing through that. I think that's really, really important. It's not a bad trope. It's great if you have somebody who can answer your questions, because you do not want mystery readers and thriller readers and suspense readers are very savvy. And especially if they're readers, not just television watchers, they know police procedure. And I don't always have it right. Trust me. There's no author can, but you have to get your information from somewhere. So what I do is I am co-owner of Crime Scene Writer with veteran police officer Wally Lind. I'm a member of Public Safety Writers Association, and I recommend both groups highly. And I ask questions. Another thing that I do is I know how I learn. I'm an auditory learner. I can read something and it doesn't compute. If I listen to a speaker explain things to me. So one of my favorite things to do is to pick up the phone And when I did my volunteer work for the Colorado Springs police or the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, I used to call the coroner, and she was a deputy coroner, and she'd pick up the phone and she'd go, "You're who? You want to do what?" And it's like, well, I'm trying to do this and do this. And I was kind of very, very timid. My husband would go into the pharmacy because I had asked the pharmacist so many questions about poisons. And all of a sudden, my husband said that everybody was standing back in line, kind of backing up, because he goes, "Yeah, my wife came in to talk to you about some poison." And so I go to the source. One of the things that I did, and these are favorite stories, and forgive me for rambling, but I went to the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. I'm getting them mixed up. And when I did the past game hunting, I met a lieutenant named Ken Hilty, and he had a sergeant with them. And I wanted to poison somebody by cyanide, right? I mean, that's what we try to do. And it's all restricted. I mean, even if, for instance, the gold mines, they account for all of that chemical, especially in the United States. So the lieutenant said to me, he goes, "Well, why doesn't she just go across the border? Where's your story taking place?" And I said, "El Paso." And he says, "Why don't you just go across the border and get it?" So if you go to the source and you have a question, these people are very generous. They love to get the answers right in your stories. So and that's why I did a task force, because I knew that I was going to be on the phone or Zooming or seeing them in person. And the funny thing about when I mentioned Chris Herndon, who was the deputy coroner, when I did the volunteer victims advocate with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, she was one of our instructors. And when I saw her for the first time, I slumped down in my chair thinking, "Oh my gosh, she's going to recognize me." And I asked a question. She goes, "Where have I heard you before?" She recognized me immediately. She has become a dear, dear friend. We've done coroner inquests together, not real coroner's inquests, but we've done it for writers. It's been a really, really invaluable experience going to the sources.
If you don't mind, I'll just add a little something on the sources. Be very careful about the timeline you're writing in, whether it's in the 50s or now. At one time, you could pick up the phone and talk to detectives or your friend at the police department, and they could run a driver's license for you or other odds and ends. Now it's in California, it's extremely difficult, and everything is audited and recorded. So if you're going to do today, be careful. Also, check what's available. On TV, they're constantly saying that registration of a 1999 Ford blue in color. Well, I'm reading a really good book today, but kind of lost interest because they describe a vehicle registration from DMV as a blah, 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 white in color. California DMV registrations don't do that. So make sure you do your research. Anyway, Donnell, I want to ask about your cover again. I listened in on a talk recently where they were promoting sales of books and how to get more. And the speaker said that blue is one of the most attracting colors. It draws attention more than most colors. Did you take that into consideration when your editor told you what your cover was going to be?
Actually, my editor is Deborah Dixon, and she's the author of Goal, Motivation, and Conflict, for anyone who, I'm sure you've heard of that book. She did everything. She did the cover. She did I had no say, but when she said, "What do you think of this?" I said, "Oh, so obviously I like blue, but I didn't know that." Interesting, George.
Okay. Now, you told us early on that you, I hate this, deleted the plumbing. Were there any other scenes that you deleted or didn't write for the Black Pearl?
I'm sure. I'm sure I have a draft file called Scrap. And and since they're all mostly writers here, how many of you delete scenes and don't save them? Good, because you should never, ever, because you never know when that's going to come in handy. Sometimes I get rid of a character and I feel really bad about it. And I'm apologizing to them and saying, you know what, I'll find a place for you in the, it's kind of like a script writer. You know, you didn't get the part this time. So you never know when that information is going to become valuable later on.
Now, oh, I just drew a blank. Oh, I read some reviews of Black Pearl, and a common thread was that they referred to the book as a police procedural in the genre. Do you agree with that, or have any comments on that?
Probably is a police procedure because I try very hard to make sure procedure is right in it.
But we think I think of it as a thriller. This is a question for the readers. As a retired cop, I kind of overlooked police procedural and looked at the thriller. Anybody have some thoughts on it that we can share with Donnell and turn into a question? Don't all jump in at once.
I think I have a question. Well, guys, some thoughts, I guess. You probably didn't think anything of it because there was nothing wrong, right? I did wonder about if you forming these kind of tasks force and doing this is common and was accurate and was something that could happen under these kind of circumstances.
What is, I don't understand the question.
Oh, I guess as I was reading it, not being an expert on police procedure, but always wanting to kind of understand how these different agencies work together. Is that something that you think is pretty realistic? And maybe this is to George also, that they would gather people from around and from police and FBI and put together this, task force of seemingly kind of unrelated,
I'll answer George just because I believe this task force would be coming from different places. I mean, especially in Black Pearl, you would not want to leave Pope, who was in Denver, out of that investigation. You would not want to leave his team of detectives out because they're working the case in Denver.
right?
The FBI has a vested interest in it because they're trying to catch a serial killer, and it's spinning off into Montrose, Colorado.
Mhm.
It made sense when they found out that one of the victims was a police officer, because they would probably use somebody undercover. It would probably make sense to bring Allison in. And I was really pleased. I consulted FBI agents, and I consulted police officers, and I did a ride along with a Colorado Springs police officer to help me create Allison. So I tried very hard to do my research. And what was interesting about the woman that I did for the Colorado Springs police officer, Goldcamp, she told me that she had been with the CSPD as a field training officer for 17 years. And the FBI had also consulted her and asked her to join. And she thought, no, I'm going to stay here. So everything that she told me made sense. And one of the other things that she told me, and I thought this was very interesting, what we see on television. I think of Ashley Judd. Do you remember when she played a police officer and she was drinking and she was sleeping around? And my field training officer said to me, don't make her a slut. We don't get where we are by being frivolous or stupid. Make her professional. And that's how I try to write Allison.
Can I jump in on that? I thought Allison was an amazing character. And the psychology behind it, where did you get that from? And is this character based on someone that you actually know? Because she was such a real character to me. Well, all of your characters were, and I loved the way you masterfully introduced us to one at a time so that we really got to know them before they were all joined together and working together as a team. But the character of Allison, she was extraordinary, first of all, because surviving what she did, and her story was kind of heart-wrenching.
Thank you. Thank you. As I said, I have a lot of personal experience with that because I lost a friend. And so I could totally relate to what Allison was going on. I had the most trouble writing Allison because if you're writing a male character, you can kind of, for another word, fake it, because I'm obviously a woman and I try to write believable male characters. But when it came time to write Allison, I thought, I'm going to have to be so deep in her head. I'm going to have to know this character. And I actually wrote, it's on my blog, about how Allison came to be. I can find it, and if anybody's interested, I can send you the link. But I have, as I said, I go to the source, and Robin Bursell and Kathy Bennett and the field training officer and numerous female police officers I consulted. And it was interesting because the two that really gave me, well, three that really gave me terrific feedback about female police officers, Robin Bursell told me that when she was a police officer, her police chief told her the only place a woman belongs is flat on her back and under a man. And, so she had to rise above this in her ranks. And Kathy Bennett, who is a former LA police officer, and she's retired now. I've got her on speed dial, and we talk and we laugh hysterically. She said, she's 5'3". She's little. She says, I'm not going to beat the heck out of anybody, but I'm going to work smart. And they can project their voice so they know so that the suspect or the witness knows they mean business. They learn how to handle themselves. And we have talked about everything about what she learned in the police academy, and at the FTO that I rode with told me how she was one of two in the police. I got this from the source, and I'll admit that. She was very fit, very feminine. And there was a woman that everybody took bets on who was going to wash out of the police academy. And 17 years later, my FTO officer was still there.
Yeah.
I want to go back to another character that I think the way you portrayed him was perfect. The ATF supervisor. How did you know how to do that? I guess you know how to do it, but tell us a little bit about him, and does he have a future in your other books?
Well, the ATF is in Until Dead. He wasn't in Black Pearl.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, then let's back off. You're right. I run your books together. I said something earlier about a thread in your book reviews about the genre. Do you read your book reviews?
I try not to, but you can't help it. There was one that was just at the recent top, and I felt so bad about it, and I wanted to respond. And one of the things that I've heard different pros and cons, and fellow writers, you can tell me about this. Do you ever respond to your reviews? I've been told don't. But there was one, I don't claim that Patrick was an epileptic, but he said, I love the book, the review said, I love the book, but don't insult epileptics. And I think I might have said it reminded them of an epileptic attack. But I felt bad about that. I really did, because I certainly would never want to insult someone with a disability. Epilepsy is a very, very it's more prevalent than autism, and no one seems to recognize that.
Darlene, you have a question?
I just wanted to say, I'm Darlene Record. I'm with the PSWA. I'm a former law
Hi,
enforcement
Darlene.
officer, and I want to tell you how much I really enjoyed your book.
Thank
And
you
you-
very much.
And you certainly did touch around a lot of the issues that women faced, especially when there really were no women, or you were one of the first coming up. And I appreciated that. I had a question though about the book, the investigation. You mentioned, when did you actually introduce the suspect? I know you had the fire scene in the prologue, but I thought it was pretty far into the book when you actually named the suspect. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That is true. Good observation. And I worried about that too, because in Until Dead, sorry to reference another book, you see the antagonist a lot earlier, but because they're looking for him, they can't find him.
Oh, okay.
So that's where the police procedure came in, is how they were going to find this individual. And when they decide to split up and move from Denver to Montrose, Colorado, they're thinking, let's see what happens when we bring Allison back to Montrose. Let's see if she can shake something up.
Very good.
Thanks, Darlene. And long time no see. I'll see you in July. I have a question that's more about you. You believe in writer's block?
I believe in distraction. I believe that you have to figure out something, especially if you're writing something you don't know about. You can research yourself to death. You can get lost in the weeds. And I think your muse is a very powerful tool. And I think you have to trust that it's guiding you. There's a writing coach her name is Becca Syme, and I may be saying her name wrong, Becca Syme or Becca Sim. And I love what she says about, calls it the 11 rules of writing, because it's basically always the 10 rules of writing. She says there's no rules, but there's fast writers, there's slow writers. And she says there's a rumor that you can't write a good book if you're writing fast. And she says that's not true. Some people can and some people can't. Some people keep calendars, some people don't. Everyone has their own writing process. And I find that if I try to take somebody else's writing process, I mess up and I spin wheels, if that makes sense. I have to trust my muse, because I have a lot of research going into this book. And my publisher told me, and I'm so grateful for this comment. She says, I want a good book, not a fast book, because I am not one of those people that can write fast. I'm working hard, and I've got a lot of distractions with my mom and 6 grandchildren since 2020. What were my kids thinking? But it's just, good grief. It's been kind of hectic for me.
Now, are you a fast writer or a slow writer? And how long does it take you? I know I'm giving you multiple questions, but I think you can handle them. How long did it take you to write the first draft of Black Pearl? And did you have a lot or just a few follow-up drafts, rewrites?
I do something different than anybody else, I think. And I can literally say that because I write in shorthand. I am old. I took Greg shorthand in high school, which was one of the best things ever, because I can sit at a doctor's office and write a chapter. And then I'll print it out in longhand. And by the time I get to the third, where I'm typing it, it's pretty much a nice polished draft. So it's the research that takes me a long time. And right now I'm writing book 3 and I'm having so much fun. There's a lot of psychology in this book, and that is not my expertise. And I'm consulting with a lot of psychologists right now for this one.
Well, that brings me to a question I was going to ask near the end, but so you have a new book in your future. Can you tell us a little bit about it and when we might expect it?
Well, as I said, with my mom and such, I'm kind of behind, but I am working. I would say I'm probably halfway through book 3. Without telling your readers or those people present what's going on, do you want to know? What should I don't want to give, I don't like to do spoilers.
No spoilers.
Okay.
No spoilers. Let's move on then and ask you some other things.
George, how about if we take a moment and just ask the group? There are a lot of you, I know you're muted and you've been very polite and staying quiet, but is there anybody who has a question or a comment even that you'd like to make about Black Pearl? Please feel free to jump in. Ellis, I see your hand raised.
Said from that I loved it. How much research did you do with the FBI? And have you worked with them directly or?
I have a good friend by the name of Pete Klismet, who was one of the first profilers of the FBI. He's retired. He's a wonderful man. He helped me a lot with that. Oh gosh, and I'm going to tell a sad story, guys. I also had a dear friend by the name of Stephen Carey Brown, and he passed away several years ago, and not several years ago, a few years ago now. And he's also on my blog, and it's called, I'll send you the link if you're interested. Maybe I should, if you sign up for my newsletter, I will put those links in there. Okay. Steve was a retired FBI agent turned private eye. And we got to be, I sent him my questions and he goes, you know what, let's just have a phone call. And he's my favorite. And we got to be so, so close. And I beta read for Steve. He's marvelous. We worked on, he didn't read a lot of Black Pearl, but he told me about the interview process. For instance, there's a scene that comes to mind where Brian goes in and he's talking to a witness and he picks up something on his desk and he says, so I see you ride bikes. You try to disarm them. You try to get them comfortable. And that's what Steve would say. And the article that I'm referring to is called All in a Day's Work by Stephen Carey Brown. If you want to read it on the blog, he is one of the most terrific people I've ever met, and I miss him dearly.
Thank you.
Mary Seifert, did you have your hand raised? Karen, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hey, Donnell. Gosh,
Hi.
I haven't seen you in so long. It's so good to see you. Hey, my question, because I absolutely love these 2 books.
Thank you.
Very much looking forward to number 3. But when you decided to switch from romantic suspense, and I have done the same thing, and I totally understand about the plumbing stuff. I mean, I'm one of those people that flips pages, you can only read that stuff so many times. But when you decided to switch over to police procedural or thriller, how did you decide to focus on cold cases versus a political thriller or something that's, happening currently?
That is a great question. And I will mention this to you. That's a 2-parter too. Nice to see you, Karen. As you know, we are in a hotbed of politics right now. And that is very, very difficult. If you want to alienate readers, put politics in your book or take a side. try not to do that. And I try to leave it out because you know what? We're reading escapism right now, and we want to forget about what's going on. We want to kind of suspend what's going on. And that's why I try to not do that. Now, I will say in Until Dead, I have politics, but I will tell you, I have a senator in the book, and I never even mention what party she's part of.
Mm.
Did I answer your question, Karen?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was mooting barking dogs. Yes,
No
but I
worries.
will, I've written one thriller and it was political. And it was, I started in 2015 because I wasn't happy with what was going on. So sometimes we write them out of frustration and don't worry.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that you can't, but I'm saying that
Well, there's a lot
sometimes
of them.
when I'm reading a book and it gets too political, and I call it, and your book was based on, I get that. But
Yeah.
some people, I call it author intrusion. You
Mhm.
know exactly how the
Yeah.
author is feeling, and that's the author speaking and not the characters.
Well, and that's not the purpose of the book or the genre for the book. It's just it is, I think that it gets away from the author, that you learn, that the reader learns that kind of stuff. In my book, that was the point. I mean, it was a
Exactly.
political
And
book.
you were very specific in your point.
Yeah.
One
much
thing that speaking of author intrusion, I wrote a book called Betrayed. And I have one character who is a marksman, a gun expert, and her daughter is anti-guns.
Mm.
And you do not know, hopefully you do not know my stance on guns, in waving to Sally, because I really enjoyed your book. But you let your characters do your speaking for it. Now, I read one book recently, and it was a great book, but he didn't like Donald Trump. And so his character is, they ask a question, he has a concussion, and they say, "Who's president of the United States?" And he goes, "Some asshole." and I get it. So,
That could be the party.
but if I was at that point, if I didn't have a sense of humor, or if I might have thrown the book against the wall. I try to leave that out of my books. Do not read me to form political. I'm not part politician, whatever that is. So,
Ellis, you have a question.
I was going to say, if you want to see what happens when you put your political opinions in something, read some reviews for Daniel Silva's The Cellist.
yes, I've read Daniel Silva, and he's one of my favorite authors, and I see that he's getting
I think he's a
harangued.
great writer, but I bet he lost half his readers with that one. The
Well, that's
reviews are love him or hate him. Nobody's in between.
Ellis, which
He-
book was
he's-
that? Which book did you say?
The Cellist.
The Chelsea.
And I read everything he writes because I just love him, but I've seen it. And that is a great example, Ellis. That is a great example.
Yeah, the reviews were amazing.
His wife, Jamie Gangle, works for CNN. So he was a former journalist. And I feel like he feels that it's very, very much part of him to do what he's doing, whether
Yeah,
it works or whether it suffers.
I think
He's-
he felt he needed to do what he did.
Right. He's very well aware of what he's doing.
I'm
That's
sure.
why I don't-
It was no surprise.
Yes, I've witnessed that, and I try not to do that. So I'm not as big as I'm going to surprise you. I'm not as big as Daniel Silva.
Yeah.
Yeah, he probably has enough readers left that it's not going to be too bad.
I've actually met him. He's a very nice man, and his wife, Jamie Gangle, is so nice also. So he probably wouldn't remember me, but I was at a book signing, and somebody handed him a baby. It was like a politician, and he sat there with this baby on his desk, and it was his bookstore. It was just standing room only. It was very fun to watch that. So
Oh,
he took a picture of the baby with him. So I was a future fan.
Hey, one more time, Mary Seifert, I think you had your hand raised earlier. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask a question or make a comment? Last chance. Okay, George, Rosa, you have a question.
I do. First, I love the book. I would also call it a thriller, like George. And I got so tickled being from the South because your character mashed on the gas. I just laughed out loud at that. I loved
Oh,
it.
good, good.
Could I make a quick comment, please?
Go right ahead.
I was picturing that task force. I mean, I'm following the conversation, but I'm picturing that task force with people from all over. And like you said, I'm thinking conflict. Man, would that be a blast? But you make a good point, nothing would get done. But I think that would be a fun thing to do. Anyway, that's all I have. Thanks.
There's a little bit more conflict in Until Dead. So,
Okay.
because they were really focused in Black Pearl, but there was kind of some manipulation going on in Until Dead.
With the senator, I have to tell you that I started looking around and skipping pages and went back because I was trying to figure out what her party was. And I thought, hey, I don't know. And that's probably a good thing. And I thought she worked really well. When I first saw her, Donnell, I thought, oh no, we're going to get into a little, but we didn't. So thank you for that.
Yes.
And on task force, I was on a task force many decades ago with about 30 agencies. And we actually, because of the target, the Hells Angels, everybody was on board. We had people of all ranks working side by side. Anyway, I've noticed that you know quite a few people here. So are there, you're obviously friends with a number of authors. How do they help you? Do they help you? What do you
Oh my
get?
gosh.
What do
Oh
you
my
get
gosh.
from them?
Authors help authors all the time. And if I can ever help any of you, I'm raising my hand. Ellis has been just wonderful. I'm a member of Ellis's Mutual Admiration Society, and I loved her book. I loved I can't remember the name, Ellis. It's been so many years. And I was wondering if you were still writing. It was about the woman who escaped. This is more of a compliment. If you can't remember the title, but you remember the plot, and her writing is absolutely brilliant. And she has
Prime Target.
Prime Target. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very good. I remember the
Donna
pecan
helps
groves.
me tremendously. She's very, very generous in giving you ideas or listening to you when you have a problem and helping. And I have used some of what you told me. You
Thank
suggest.
you. Vice versa.
I may never get the book finished. We'll see.
It's tough. It's really tough, and your muse cooperates or it doesn't, and life certainly interferes.
Yeah,
That was a great book, by the way.
thank you.
And we did read Prime Target as part of Mystery Book Club a few months ago, last year sometime, right? It was well received. It was very good.
You know, you're talking about a number of different authors and books here. So I'm going to ask you, Donnell, what is your favorite novel?
Oh, oh gosh.
And
Wow.
it doesn't have to be a current author. You could, go back.
I'll
as
tell
far
you
as-
authors that have inspired me. I loved Lawrence Sanders. If you ever read the Deadly Sin series, the first deadly sin, the second deadly sin, the third deadly sin. The third deadly sin was about a female serial killer. He was so ahead of his time, it was ridiculous. And the fact that obviously Hollywood agreed and made Frank Sinatra Edward X. Delaney. And Edward X. Delaney, if you remember a character's name after all that time, he was such a great character. I could see him eating his sandwiches over the sink. You know, he was a street cop. He was, you know, and his wife was passing away from cancer. And I mean, just such a real person. And he goes and he's not getting cooperation because from the police department. So he winds up unlikely, you know, some characters, still civilians, to help him solve his case in The First Deadly Sin. One of my favorite authors is Taylor Caldwell. Taylor Caldwell writes, hold on just a minute. Hold on. Let's see here.
She's looking for a book. I can tell you that sometimes when I want to find a book, I must spend an hour going through my bookcases.
Right. Well, this is called The Glory and the Lightning by Taylor Caldwell. And her research, she did Dear and Glorious Physician about St. Luke, and she did Great Lion of God about St. Paul, and she shows their flaws. She just, you know, they weren't what in those days, the Christians, Luke hated God. He believed in God, but he thought he was a mean, manipulative God. So, and Taylor Caldwell, she writes so beautiful. She wrote one of the first, I think Glory and Lightning is the one with, where her protagonist is a concubine. And she was the first female women's liber. So I just really like Taylor Caldwell.
Okay. Well, following up on that, is there an author out there that you just did not care for at all, that over time you became a fan?
Oh, probably. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head. I mean, I've seen authors. I was a former contest coordinator. I've seen authors grow. And I will say that I have seen somebody turn in a draft that wasn't all that and come back and they make it, they enrich it, they layer it, they grow better as a writer. The great thing about writing is you're never in one place. You either learn or you don't.
Judy, did you have a question?
No, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I have a comment. When I was reading the book, your name, Donnell Bell. Where have I heard that name? I'm so familiar with that name. Oh yeah, the writers, the police, the writers group that you co-sponsored, and I've been listening and
Crime
writing.
scene
And
writer.
I have heard you speak, yes, and I have heard you speak and say things and read what you've written, and so that's why. And so that made the book even better for me, knowing that I had some insight about who you were from that point of view. But I enjoyed it, and I like the way you handled your main characters. There were a lot of characters, I'll say that, but they, like Sally said, you established them so that we knew who they were. The main
I
characters.
hope so. That's a really good point. And one of the things that I worried about when I was writing it was too many characters. They're going to be confused. But I tried to bring them in gradually. So thank you for that. How do you feel about too many characters? Did anyone feel that I had too many characters?
No, I did not feel that way. Of course, I wrote a book that had many characters in it too, and I worried about that. But, you know, when you're writing something where, you know, you have so many different entities involved, how can you not have as many characters as you need? So I didn't think there were too many. And it certainly was. This is one of those books where, you know, if you had to put it down, you pick it back up, you knew who you were reading about, you knew the characters, you didn't forget anybody. I never once had to go back and go, who was that? I don't know who it is. So no, you did not have too
Thank
many
you for that.
characters.
I appreciate that. One thing about it, and I would assume that because we're all sisters in crime, we're mystery readers. And if you watch a television program, you know that the 5 people that they introduce, one of those is going to be the suspect, right? Is going to be the killer or the person who commits the crime. And so it's kind of fun when you're a mystery author that you can really put in those red herrings and leave the reader guessing.
I think it builds suspense too, with the way you worked the antagonist. I mean, we didn't really have a sense of the antagonist. Well, we had suspicions of different people that, you know, like Seth, who didn't work out to be the antagonist at all, but fit the profile. So you did that well, and I think it built a lot of suspense as we went into it. And I love suspense because it, like Alfred Hitchcock, it pulls the audience in and holds them rather than, you know, where it's just gore.
Absolutely. That's
You know,
a
like a
really
murder.
great comment about gore too, because how do you feel? One of the things that I don't like, because as I said, I was trained as a victims advocate from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. I don't want to witness horror. I don't want to witness blood and guts everywhere. I know it happens. I prefer things off screen. Now there is a time that you see a small scene. George, I just remembered a book that you asked me about, and I'll tell you about this. I know this woman, she's lovely. She's a New York Times bestselling author. She's fantastic. She wrote a book about, and the first scene was so graphic that I put it down and I haven't picked her back up again. And I'm not going to name her name. So, but I am a huge fan of her personally. She's wonderful and a very talented author.
I like the way you, actually I got 2 questions, but I'll give them to you one at a time. But this question is like the woman you're talking about, the author. You do a fine job of leading us up and letting our minds fill in blanks. Is that something that's hard for you to do, or is something you learned over time?
I think that because we have so much media that it used to be when someone wrote description, they had pages and pages of description because readers loved it. They needed that visual. Now we have those visuals. And so I also try to combine character and setting so that you see what the setting is through the character's eyes and not just, it was a dark and stormy night. Apologies to Daphne du Maurier, who's also one of my favorites. So.
Did you finish that? Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Well, you make me laugh with the dark and dreary night. I want to start a scene with, it was not a dark and dreary night.
It was hot and sunny and mosquitoes were everywhere.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something, and this is not about Black Pearl, but this is something that I think is really what an author can get away with, because obviously I don't know what I am, but I'm not big. I cannot get away with something that somebody, a larger author does. And I'll mention this because he's one of my favorites. It's John Grisham.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite books is Camino Island. And if you've ever seen, I was stunned. I'm reading this book, and in the book, he does something about a well-known university, a well-known college who's just, Ivy League. And I'm thinking all the way through it, I'm thinking, how does he get away with that? How did his editors, how did his publisher let him get away with it? Well, he's John Grisham, right? So at the end of the book, I'm reading the author's note, right? And it says, apologies to XXXX, in case you're going to read it. I'm not going to do a spoiler, but it's because he's John Grisham. So And there's authors who can get away with things, and I'm not one of them.
One of the ways I think that every author can get away, if you want, in quotes, with their characters, is that characters are human. And whether it's a cop or whether it's just person who lives just an everyday life, their personality can color their job because of who they are. And what they bring to their position is their character or lack of character or whatever. But I think personality can be so strong that you can have people say and do things that other people, colleagues of theirs, wouldn't.
Right.
To a certain degree. I'm not saying you can break every rule, but I am saying personality does drive even the job. So I think you can get away with some things. And it's fun to play that.
Absolutely. And it's fun to play with your characters and see and test them.
Does anybody here write under a pseudonym? Oh, we do. Oh, Betsy does.
You gotta unmute, Betsy.
You gotta unmute.
Let me send her
Okay.
Okay.
I write it under a couple of pseudonyms too, George.
Oh,
I
yes,
know
Mike
you
does
do.
too.
I know you do, Mike.
Yes, I do, but nothing that I've been, nothing's been published under a pen name. Everything has been kind of for specific, like a horse magazine or a particular literary magazine, like in college. So it was under my name, but I don't plan to use my name when I finally finish these 2 novels.
I believe, and somebody can correct me, back in when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we weren't allowed, if we wrote a magazine article, we weren't allowed to use a pseudonym.
Have you
So-
ever considered using one, Donnell?
I did. I asked my publisher about it and they thought my name was pretty recognizable and they discouraged it. So I did put Ann in the middle because I didn't want to be confused as a professional football player. So it's an unusual name and I rhyme, so.
Okay, well, we're over an hour. So what I'd like to do before we wrap it up here is make, once again, ask if anybody has any questions or comments they'd care to make.
I'd like to make a couple of plugs. I'm sorry to take your time if y'all don't mind. For our scene setting, our May speaker, actually, we're going to have author Julia Spencer Fleming talk about setting the scene. So I think
That's awesome.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
Flag,
And
yeah.
the other thing, quickly, I'm just going to put it in the chat. A Sisters in Crime group. See if I can find my note. Coastal Cruisers on Saturday is having an event open to anybody. It's about a anatomy of a murder investigation. And I'm just sitting it in this chat there. If y'all, you can contact me or Sally. I'm sure we can get that to you. It's in our newsletter. But it's about, you can see Patrick O'Donnell, creator of Cops and Writers podcast, is going to walk through the steps of a murder investigation from start to finish. So anyway, maybe somebody would like that. So I put that in the chat. And that's all.
Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Thank you.
And George, you want to give us a preview of next month's book? And author?
Oh, yeah, actually, our next month's speaker is Michael Black, who just answered up that he occasionally writes under a pseudonym. Mike, would you care to come on and say hi and introduce yourself? Give us a hint?
Well, I had so much trouble signing on to this. I didn't want to interrupt things. So that's why I kept it on mute. But I was very impressed with with Donnell's book and the presentation. And your questions were good too.
Okay, well,
And he
thank you.
is such a talent. Besides, he is so prolific. When you talk about a fast writer and somebody who's good besides, He's a former police officer, but he's also an expert on Shakespeare. He's just so well read. What day is that on? I should know this. I can look it up, but
Wednesday.
he is really,
It's-
really,
we-
he did
we
another,
need
he is also on my blog. And he wrote a book about the streets of Chicago. What, do you remember the name of that, Mike?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What was the name of the blog that you did for me that about Chicago and about how you got a suspect? What, I'll put it in.
Warrantless in Chicago?
What, it was at Chicago, yes.
Warrantless in Chicago, yeah. We were.
Warrantless in Chicago. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. So he's also, and it's under my website and it's called Help from My Friends Friday. And I'm behind a couple of weeks because I obviously had a lot going on, but Warrantless in Chicago, I believe it, I put it as one of my favorites. So it stands out.
Speaking of bookcases, Mike can fill a bookcase. How many books have you got out there now, Mike?
You know, I'm getting close to 50. But I kind of lost count, so. I'll have to tell you.
Oh, that's great. Yes. that's-
Anyway,
and-
Mike is a great writer. He has written a number of books and a number of he's written almost 50 books. He's also runs the PSWA Public Safety Writers annual conference. I don't know how he does all the things that he does. And at the same time, he's a mentor to many, many other folks.
Absolutely.
So-
And he's published with Alfred Hitchcock too, guys. So
Could I
Any
make a
other
quick-
last comments there?
Yes, could I make just a quick, I'm so disappointed. This is my name's Lynn Danley. And I'm a relatively new Sisters in Crime member. This is the second meeting that I tried to attend. The first one I missed, and the second one I've come in right at the tail end. So I need to make sure, like, where are you? Because my meetings on my Google Calendar they're coming on at the wrong time. So I don't want to come in late anymore.
So this is for Mystery Book Club.
Your mystery, okay, and where are you?
We're located in South Carolina.
That's what I
but
thought.
Okay, so it's Eastern time at noon.
And
The next meeting is May 10th when we're reading Mike Black's Chimes at Midnight.
okay, so the meetings are always at Eastern time at noon. See,
That's right.
I've been getting them landing at 10 o'clock. Maybe there's something wrong with my calendar. So I will check. I'll make sure that it's at 9 here. I'm in Portland, Oregon. So
Okay.
Tara, do you get our email newsletters? Are you getting those?
I believe so. But when I click any link to put it in Google, it's putting it at 10, I guess, instead of at 9.
Oh.
Well, aren't they in South Carolina? So
No, we're at noon. Noon,
we're at
always
South-
noon, second
Eastern.
Wednesday of the
so
month.
9 o'clock, Mike.
Noon Eastern, yeah.
9 o'clock, Mike. How's the weather in South Carolina?
Today it's
Beautiful.
Sorry
today.
about that. It was
Wonderful.
recorded. So, oh gosh, I've done that too. I get in and it's at the tail end. It's frustrating.
Oh, I know. I've done it twice now, both of the meetings. I missed the last one, which was on I think it was on the time change. So I thought that maybe that's why it did it. Maybe that's what's happened. I don't know. So anyway, I'll make sure that it shows 9 o'clock and then I can come on time. I'm sorry I missed this. It sounded like it was great.
Okay. We
I'll
don't want you to miss anything. So I am going to stop recording